Hello, I'm Gosha from Cosmic Agency, and I'm going to share with you today a very important video, one of the most important topics that Swaruu wanted to share with everybody, and it has to do with genetics, with how we are led to believe that we are so dependent on genetics, on our genes, how we were modified in laboratories by the extraterrestrials, and how we were dumbed down and limited in our fullness of being by some laboratory experiments and alterations. And she's explaining it's not true, but I'm gonna let her explain. But it is very important subject, one of the most important subjects ever, because it just points to the power within, and it just brings back who we are here, and it destroys the matrix, literally. The realization of what she's going to be talking about, deep realization and application of these truths, is going and is destroying the matrix illusion. So I'm going to leave you with this, and at the end I'm going to just add 2 cents from myself.
You are not limited in any way genetically. It does not work that way. You are trapped in a materialistic mentality that doesn't let you see how the real science of genetics really works. Genes are an expression developed by consciousness, a materialization of an intention. Genes are not fixed set items, blueprints of which you are a victim during your life. Genes can be overwritten, can be erased, and can be developed as entirely new ones. Entirely new ones are created all the time. They respond to stimuli from the outside world, that is, outside the cell that holds them. That stimuli comes as the result of the subject's perception of the outside world, and the subject's perception is dependent on its consciousness, awareness, and frequency of existence. This last statement can be clearly understood studying the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton, epigenetics. But what I am telling you here goes far beyond Bruce's work. What I am telling you is that epigenetics is not only how mind and perception alters your body to a genetic level, but it actually is how your entire body is built. It is the result of your perception and your consciousness intention, as well as your frequency of existence. Genes develop as a shadow interpretation of what you are in a level or a plane of existence above the one you are perceiving, study, or living in. Each point and minute particle of matter that makes up your genes come as the result of an energy pattern, standing wave, concentration manifestation process directly as the result of your focused intention, consciousness, and frequency. See Mechanics of Manifestation for expanded data. It has been said that you were limited genetically in a laboratory by beings like the Anunnaki, who created the human species splicing genes from a monkey. Other versions say from scratch, not using a monkey. All this is not accurate. It is said that your higher brain functions, such as telepathy, claircognizance, and so on, have been edited out, altering your genes. It's been said that you have been limited in lifespan as well. You have not. All those higher psychic abilities do not reside in the brain, nor do they reside in a gene. There is nothing to edit out. Those psychic abilities come from your energetic body and your spiritual essence, higher self. They are not physical. There is no center for telepathy. There is no center for claircognizance. The only point or brain structure that mildly resembles that is the pineal gland, but it's only a translator. It does not control your higher mental functions. The way you have been limited is with the extensive use of mind control. This is, the controllers have led you to believe with arguments and with compelling yet false ideas that you are living in a deterministic world. That is, you are living in a place where you experience and suffer things that are not under your control. Victim mentality. Everyone there on earth is telepathic, claircognizant and psychic. But you are trained to ignore when you are having an experience of that sort. So you can no longer recognize when you are being telepathic, for example, as you automatically ignore the subtle messages. But once you understand this and how it works, you will start to see that in fact you are telepathic. It's those subtle messages you feel about anything or about anyone, an inner knowing that doesn't come from you. This is what you have been trained to ignore and to pass for false. In your world, you are taught to discredit feelings and emotions as something unwanted, as something that contradicts logic, as if it were high understanding. What you feel and your emotions are higher wisdom. They are who you are as a soul. The moment you discredit them, yours or those of others, you are losing a great part of your soul. Humans have been genetically intervened all the time throughout history. I am not saying they have not been. What I'm trying to say is that they were not created like that as a species. But they are altered at each individual level by other species or stellar races for various reasons. For example, to accommodate the frequency of a to-be mother for her to be able to carry out a good pregnancy, to bring a high-frequency starseed into your world. If this is not done, many times it will result in nervous damage to the mother or to the child, and in many cases it does lead to miscarriage. Another example of genetic manipulation by another star race, benevolent one, is to heal subjects presenting severe damage to their body, in order to permit them to fulfill their life plan, as their life is in danger. This is done quite commonly, but as I said above, it depends on each individual's life plan, so not all subjects who get sick will be repaired. Throughout history, many attempts to alter the human genome have been made by regressive and invasive species, by the cabal, and it's still going on. But as genes are not a fixed, deterministic, inflexible things, and due to humans' high contact rate with Source and with higher self, they have a tendency to rewrite themselves back into their original configuration, erasing the modification. Why are these attempts being made? What do they try to achieve? They want to achieve total control over humans, over the human race, in order to exploit them the most effective and efficient way possible, to make them slaves. If humans have high contact with Source, they end up rebelling. And history has demonstrated that over and over again. Going back to what I said earlier about the genes rewriting themselves to their original configuration. When DNA is aggressively altered in an invasive way, as you would do in a laboratory, it has the tendency to immediately return to its original configuration given by the consciousness perception of the owner subject. This will occur very fast, in a matter of weeks, in the 5th density. But on Earth, due to the low density, slow manifestation properties, it may take more time, but it's directly dependent on each subject. In the worst case scenario, it may take 1 generation before it returns to original DNA configuration, The only way to make aggressively made laboratory changes to DNA permanent is to keep the subject in a very low consciousness state and state of mind. This is, the subject must be kept in fear, with a clear deterministic view and interpretation of reality, alienated from source consciousness, from higher self, and as far away as possible from the unified field of consciousness. This way, the subject, from above, will order its genes to remain in a deterministic state that matches its consciousness and perception of reality. This is also why sodium fluoride is used in large quantities and everything else that calcifies and therefore isolates the pineal gland, as well as the widespread use of drugs, especially psychotropic ones, to suppress especially alert individuals, also calling them crazy or mentally ill, labeling it as schizophrenia, psychosis, depression, Asperger's, autism, attention deficit, and other false psychopathies. The normal population is imposed not only the use of pharmaceutical drugs with enormous damage to their systems due to secondary or side effects that are nothing more than the real effects put there by them under the excuse of masking a symptom, they are also socially imposed the use of harmful substances that separate the unified I, the original source, and keeps them very much in 3D, in the material, in the tangible, always maintaining them within a concept of the deterministic reality of victims, accepting as true only what comes from their material senses. And that is living within an invasive mental control matrix that determines that only the Newtonian exists. These substances are especially alcohol, tobacco, and coffee. As an example, all the so-called higher functions of the brain that are said to be edited out of humans cannot be genetically altered because they are not genes. They are simply suppressed by action of a belief system imposed upon humans, where those aspects of consciousness and of reality are simply taken as non-existent, therefore ignored by the subject. But in the case of other genes, the ones that do control genetic disorders and autoimmune illnesses and other worse ones such as cancer, which do have a genetic component to them although not entirely dependent on genes, will maintain the negatively configured genetic structure if the connection to source of the subject is effectively suppressed. The modification of the human genome by aggressive means in a laboratory with intention of keeping humans under control and as slaves intended for various purposes is not necessary. All that must be done is to mind control the population into accepting a belief system that will result in the subjects themselves changing their genetic configuration or structure to the one that suits the controllers. This last statement is important because it's what has been going on for the better part of 12,500 years on Earth. The controllers, whoever they are, not to be debated here at this time, not only know this, but they apply this with mastery. They make people believe something, and the people will eventually change their genes. It takes time, but they are patient. And they are patient because their lifespan by far exceeds the one of humans. This is working against humans because they are incapable of seeing things clearly when there is an agenda that involves slow but controlled changes that involve generations. Humans only can perceive what changes their immediate reality, sometimes being blind to changes that are done to them during the course of their lifetime. Change is the only constant in the universe. But that doesn't mean all changes are good. And that doesn't mean you should not react to changes that are affecting you directly or indirectly, both as a species and as an individual. Humankind is not equipped to see interests in an expanded context as to things that affect the entire species. They only can effectively perceive interests that involve their immediate survival, with rare exceptions, of course. You do not need an aggressively done genetic change imposed on humans to alter and change their genetics. Only behavioral modification is necessary. The imposition of a belief system such as religion, including science, as its dogmatic, therefore also a religion, and as a result, a genetic change will occur in the subject population in an acceptable period of time. Why so much interest in making us believe that we were manipulated in a laboratory, or come from a monkey, or hybridized with a monkey? Because the moment you discover that you are not limited, your consciousness will rise, and you will be liberated from the illusion of the matrix. You will have all your abilities. You will realize everything that goes on, and therefore the matrix will end. How much is genetics linked to 4D and higher? The link with it is total, and not only with the 4D, but with all the densities, being part of a whole, of the same. If a person is disconnected or isolated, it is their own ideas and beliefs of limitation that provide the genetic stability of artificial change. But that change does not have to be made in a laboratory. The body itself follows the instructions of the mind, following the concepts of epigenetics at a cellular and intracellular level, as Dr. Bruce Lipton has described in great detail. Just that what he left out, I suppose because he does not have the proof yet, because I doubt very much that he hasn't thought of it before, is that it goes much further than epigenetics, to the extent of explaining the entire formation of all DNA, and with it, of the individual and the species itself. The mind and consciousness create the individuals, their genetics, and all their personal traits at the total level. What I am saying is that epigenetics is not only how the mind and perception alter your body at a genetic level, but that it is how the whole body is constructed. With the mental control, which part of genetics is changed? Is there any part in particular that is the one that is altered? Mind control has the potential to change all genetics, every aspect of it. To change a particular aspect, you only need to study what behavior, what ideas, concepts and beliefs are the ones that would influence a particular gene. But rarely, if at all, there is talk of altering a single gene. For what? Groups or segments of interrelated genes are altered that in the end will give the desired result from the point of view of the controllers. The whole genetics can be changed, or just one part. It is only necessary to change the mentality of the individual, his perception, his concepts of what is and is not real. In the 90s, in the USA, an experiment was conducted that ended up classified and was not disclosed to the public as it was, only altered and suppressed. However, the data has reached me. A group of elderly people was taken and isolated in a community made as or structured as a town or small city, isolated from the outside world, but set as it was in the 1950s. All people were over 80 years of age. The town that was used was one of those that would be used for the atomic tests in the 50s. Evidently, it was never used. Everything was as it was in the 50s. Cars, food, music, even radio stations. All set as in 1955. As the weeks passed, they were all rejuvenated, and their ailments were mostly disappearing. After 3 months, everyone was walking energetically, without walking sticks. At 6 months, all had a physical body structure of at least 10 to 20 years younger, in some cases up to 25 years younger. Everything is in the mind. Those old people were mentally back in 1955, and their bodies, their genetics, was doing its best to adapt to the perception of the mind. They were completely immersed in a stimulus according to the idea of the 1950s. They were still in the 90s, but by perception, they were not. They were back in 1955. I am aware that there is scientific evidence of genetic tampering in the laboratory on humans. I am not denying this fact, but what I am pointing out is the fact that those artificial changes do not constitute the reason, nor do they affect the whole as a species. They are localized and limited. An example of this is the said genomic telomeron that are at the end of the genetic sequence and are said to be the point or the genetic structure that controls and limits human lifespan. This is not so. Those genomic telomerons shorten a notch year by year as the result of the idea that you are aging, and are not the cause of aging. As with so many things, human science has things backwards. So what are they for, these telomeres? It is said that they control aging. This is not so. The genomic telomerons in general are part of any gene sequence and are lost due to other factors like being exposed to an aggressive and not nourishing hostile environment. Again, they shorten because of your perception of reality. You, the individual, has the idea or the perception that reality is hostile. But that is perception, and perception is dependent on belief systems and consciousness awareness. The reason why the telomeres shorten with the years is as a consequence of the idea that it is getting older. It is not the cause, it is a symptom, not a cause. The genes, therefore the telomeres, do not work as a bad copy of a copy of a copy that ends up degrading the sharpness of the original. You are not copying music from an audio cassette from the 70s. Because that is at least one of the explanations that you have been given. That you age because the cells are copied to be replaced by new ones, as part of the normal process of body regeneration, and that during the process data is lost because of the shortening of the telomeres, resulting in deficient cells that, summed up, give the final result of an aged person. The genes can be replicated with total clarity and reliability in a virtually infinite way. Is my unconscious body perception and reality connected to the collective one? Because if so, even if I work on myself and change my beliefs, really change them, if the collective doesn't, I will still age, right? It is connected with the collective. It is because you have an agreement with the collective to perceive reality the way you do. aging, sky is blue, roses are red, and a cowboy sings a sad, sad song. Agreement. But you can override it. You can drastically slow it down. Swaruu, maybe you can explain a bit how to override the genetics with consciousness, because you said that the collective unconscious plays a role here too. Then, how to override the genetics that is manifested on the basis of limited collective beliefs? It overrides genetics because they are perceptions. They are the external world in which the individual lives. Perceptions and experiences give you the framework of beliefs that in themselves form consciousness and individual frequency. This is what naturally modifies or overrides the genes of the individual. It is not necessary to modify a species such as the human one in the laboratory if there is a more effective and easier way to achieve the desired behavior, the application of mental control and social engineering. Sorry, Swaruu, you said perceptions and experiences give you the framework of beliefs that form consciousness and individual frequency. Okay, if my perception and experience is of my aging parents, for example, then this gives me my belief we age. How to override this having the experiences around that only validate getting old? I see old people. This I perceive, and this is the experience that I have. This gives me framework of belief, which afterwards will only validate more aging. It's a loop. How to get out of the loop and override this? That's why you are still aging. If you saw everyone around you not aging, why would you? What you describe is part of the matrix, how it affects you even with a high consciousness. Still, yes, you can fight it personally. Understanding that the fact that you see other people aging does not mean that you also do or that you will. You age because you are convinced you must age. It's not enough to change your mindset. It helps. But in 3D, you must accept that your body is functioning as apart from you due to the extra low frequency soup and density you live in. This means that your body is not well synchronized with your consciousness. And this is because, like it or not, data is part of what defines 3D density, your apparent separation from source. Your body functions like your unconscious because it is your unconscious. So it is reacting with a set or before set program that is what keeps you in a deterministic mindset as you fail to see any immediate or short-term changes to your body, even in spite of your efforts to raise your frequency and your consciousness, as well as your connection to source. You must treat your body as your unconscious, with the direct intention of changing a program. And one of the most effective tools to do so is repetition. Okay, now they say that human life is getting longer now. Before the average was 40. I've heard that. What do you think about that? That's life expectancy. It obeys other things that have nothing to do with the final length of the human being that is around 85 to 90 years old. Although there is data that claims that 120 years is the right thing to live by design. Also, to the phenomenon of aging we must add environmental and toxic factors that also influence the final result. Factors such as the hostile environment, stress, cortisol, food poisoned by GMOs and chemicals. The high gravity of the Earth, because the human being was designed for a gravity of 80% of that of Earth. This directly influences the cartilages and bones, as well as the skin and other internal organs. What influences more? Mental control and beliefs or the factors you mentioned? As far as aging is concerned, everything influences, but the environmental factors fall to a distant second place after the state of perception consciousness of the individual. Everything is mind control. Humans are not modified. The Sumerian tablets are for mental control. People validate them because other civilizations that supposedly had no contact with Sumeria also say more or less the same, like the Popol Vuh, but they forget something. Yes, they had contact, and in the whole world. It is the same agenda. Impose the idea that you are limited. That is false. Yes, there are more humans out there, and they are the same. They were not created, much less on Earth. Thank you, Swaruu. Wow, this topic is one of the most important to convey to the people, so thank you very much for clarifying it so well. Thank you both, and see you tomorrow.
It was one of my favorite topics ever, and one of the most crucial messages of Swaruu to the human world, because it is something that literally gives us the power back and destroys the matrix, as I said in the beginning. I'm going to make just a short summary of some points that I find to be crucial in this video. First of all, the genes are just a shadow expression, the reflection of something beyond this direct, physical, immediate perception of the reality. They are the shadow reflection of who we are and what we are on the higher planes of ourselves, of our perception, because it also responds to the stimuli. It is a reflection of who we are on the higher planes, and of the intention of who we are on the higher planes. They respond to the stimuli from the outside, and they react to that perception, intention, frequency of what we believe ourselves to be, not just here, but also on the other plane of ourselves. So the genes are just following a pattern that is imprinted and that is giving it its form and shape and expression from the higher plane. It is a shadow of something that is invisible and lies beyond in the etheric field of ourselves. This leads to the point that there is no need and no practicality and no use trying to modify and alter the genes in the laboratory, extraterrestrials or no extraterrestrials, because this is not where our expression and our powers and our true nature originates. The genes are just the shadow expressions of who we are and our intention, frequency, perception from beyond. So this is not something that was done in laboratories, and it was tried, the attempts were made, as it was explained, but by the connection with the source that the genes have, being the reflection of ourselves on the source level, the nature of ourselves, the nature of the genes goes back to the original state, to its original state. Because as I said, if we are here and the genes are here as a reflection of this, manipulating the shadow is not going to create any permanent change, because what is projecting the genes is on another plane. So in order to change the expression of the genes, and in order to control and manipulate the expression of the humanity on this level, what needs to be done is manipulation of the perception of the mind, because the genes are the reflection of the mental state and the perception, the frequency and the intention of ourself. Only through the manipulation of the perception, and only through the ways to disconnect us on this level from the source, the more permanent changes on a genetic level can be realized. And this is what has been done throughout the centuries by manipulating our perception through religious systems, scientific systems, through the dogmas, and through all kinds of false beliefs and mental manipulations. And they have time and they have patience to do this because their lifespan is much longer than ours, and they just don't care to do it throughout the centuries. Whereas in our case, we are only focused on what we see in our immediate reality, on the results that we can directly perceive and see and interact with, and we are not able to perceive all these other long-term changes and influences that has been realized and performed on the humanity. So that's the state of things. Epigenetics is the study of the expressions of the genes, how they express themselves and how they get modified, how they move and evolve throughout the interaction with the environment, the influences from the outside. Now, what's really interesting in this video is that, as Swaruu explained, the genes are not just the expression and the reaction and the product of our perception. Not only the genes in our body, but the entire body is the product and the consequence and the reflection of our perception of us on the etheric field. The whole body, the way it is the reflection of our intention and our perception from another side of ourselves, from another plane of ourselves. It is the product of our subconscious, especially here in a 3D, in this 3D electromagnetic matrix soup, where we are not completely in touch with our consciousness, with our elevated state. So the body, experiences its existence in a separate way, in a way, that's the illusion of it, but it is the reflection of the unconscious perception of ourselves. In the higher planes, they have that intention, and that process is more conscious, and here it is more unconscious, but it still keeps being the reflection of something from beyond. So she's saying the body itself, not just the gene modifications, but the body itself, the way it is expressed here, the way we have our face, the way we have our hands, the way it is formed, it is the reflection of our intention, perception, frequency on the other side. We have not been modified and limited in the laboratories. For example, the extrasensory perception and telepathy. They say that all these superior intellectual powers and telepathy have been cut off in laboratory alterations. But it's impossible, as she explains, because these powers don't originate in the genes. They don't originate in the genes. The genes are only the shadow, the expression of the patterns from beyond. So the only way to suppress those powers within us is by manipulating us and convincing us that these powers don't exist, that it's ridiculous and absurd and laughable. And as soon as we start to believe that, this is when the genes start reacting and adapting their modification and their expression to match our intention and our belief. The genes match our consciousness, not the consciousness, the genes. The genes are just the shadow of our consciousness and the perception. With this, what I want to say, and that's why this topic is so crucial and essential, and I think one of the most important ones that Swaruu has shared. With this, I want to say that we are not victims. This is what they want us to believe by seeding these ideas into our psyche, that we have been altered genetically. They want us to believe that, because once we believe that, okay, then there's nothing we can do, right? The power is outside of ourselves. They took our genes away from us, and so there's nothing we can do. That's what they want us to believe. That's manipulation, and that's false, and that's lies. They have been using mental manipulation in order to switch off our genes. Our power is still here. Our power lies in our perception and in our mind, and we can switch it back on. If we were victims throughout the centuries, if our ancestors in a way were victims, okay, being manipulated throughout the centuries, then it is up to us right now to return that power back to the humanity, to switch the genes back on by using the same method, affecting and influencing and adapting and changing our mind and our perception and of those around us in a gentle way, of course, or not so gentle, that's up to you. Our ancestors were brainwashed, yes, but now that's why we came in, and it's our job to switch it back on, to give that power back on, to reprogram using the same methods, the perception and the genes and the full potential of who the humans, who we are. That's why we are here. That's why, among many reasons, why the newest starseeds are here, to affect the perception of the humanity and to make them believe again in themselves and return that belief into the human collective psyche, so the genetics can wake up, so the DNA can activate. It's through the perception of knowing absolutely beyond any shadow of the doubt that we are not limited and never have been. It's not just about catching the Cabal ships and Pleiadians and other races fighting the Cabal and doing all kinds of things that, by the way, they have been doing, and they are doing their job from there, and it's very, very, very demanding job, but it is our job from within to alter the perception of the human consciousness. They cannot do it from there. They have limited capacities to affect the human consciousness being from there. That's why we are here, incarnated from the inside, seeding these ideas and living those ideas in the human society, and inserting these ideas and beliefs back into the society. It's not like we are inserting something new. We are inserting something that has always been part of who we are. It's just forgotten, and the humans have forgotten this, and that's why us, the newest starseed, because in a way we all originate from somewhere else, but the newest starseeds, the ones with the more fresh memory of this, don't forget who you are, maintain your frequency, and keep inserting and seeding your unlimitedness and your indestructibility into the human collective. This is our job, to return the power to the humans. That's all for now. Please watch the video again. It was very important, and start living your power. This is who we all are. Thank you so much, and until next video. Bye bye.